Welcome back to the next big thing. My name is Chris Gennady, Global Head of Research at Wisdom Tree. Today I am joined by our friend, someone that we've worked with now for some time at Wisdom Tree, Rebecca Rapple. Rebecca is an AI consultant that works with Wisdom Tree, and we have at Wisdom Tree been ramping up our knowledge, particularly in the research team, of how to best utilize and leverage all these fun tools that are coming out. I mean, it's December of 2024. It feels like there's an announcement from OpenAI, just one of the many companies now that does this almost every day, about a new offering, a new tool, a new capability. So staying just up to date and feeling like you're up to date is quite a task, and we're going to have a lot to talk about today with Rebecca. But first and foremost, we do have to, as always, go through the following. Before we begin, I do need to state the following to clarify: the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Wisdom Tree and Rebecca Rapple and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the full discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. And so with that done, Rebecca, I feel like we have to introduce. I've been excited to meet you in person in New York. We've been talking now. It's probably closer to a couple of months, but it feels like we've known each other for years. But I would love our audience to start to become familiar with your journey and how you've ended up in this position today, working with clients like Wisdom Tree on their AI journey.
Yeah, that is a broad question, Chris. So,
That's what we do here.
I think the gist of my story is that I've always been interested in kind of the fundamental question of what makes us the same and what makes us different as humans. And that's brought me through a lot of different aspects of storytelling. I've been in marketing. I've actually did direct sales at the beginning of my career, which was a fantastic, fantastic learning experience. And most recently, before really diving into AI, I was actually the CEO of a Emmy award-winning documentary film company, which was a wild, wild experience because prior to joining and being a co-owner of that company, I had absolutely no experience in filmmaking whatsoever. And what you might be able to grasp from this, little dive is that I really like diving into the deep end of things, and I really like learning new subjects and really trying to synthesize ideas across, across large walls. And so on the one hand, like, you might not see much continuation throughout my career, but on the other hand, so much of it is about seeing what kind of deep end I can find for myself and diving in head first. And after selling my documentary company in 2020, I knew for certain that like the area that I really wanted to dive into was artificial intelligence. And this was 2 years before ChatGPT came out. And while there was some buzz around AI, it's not the same that it is today. But I had seen the potential. There's actually a documentary on AlphaGo, which was a Google product that basically tried to learn the game Go, which is like way more intense and complex than chess. And the fact that it was able to be successful at that, like as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, this is something that like we really need to be focusing on. And so from 2020 through today, I've spent basically every single waking hour really thinking about what might artificial intelligence do, not just to our work lives, but to our personal lives and to our society. And I've explored that from a whole bunch of different angles. But, around 8 months ago, it really hit me that like AI had gotten to the point where I thought it could be valuable for companies now. Prior to that, that's not to say that there weren't applications of AIs that were valuable before that, because there absolutely were, but there wasn't this general purpose technology in the form of large language models that I felt was up to the snuff of actually working in a corporate environment. And in my opinion, in our society today, corporate environments are the place where we see some of the largest and broadest societal impacts. So I really wanted to jump into the, front row seats and see how is this going to play out in companies? Where are we going to hit snags? What are going to be some of the leading adoption trends and also some of the laggards? Like where's this rubber going to meet the road? And so I've been working with a handful of companies all across different verticals. Wisdom Tree is my company in the financial vertical, and really just trying to see what is taking traction and where are we hitting unforeseen challenges in terms of adoption.
And Rebecca, it's interesting because Mobeen and I, as we are explaining, because Mobeen and I, obviously at Wisdom Tree, we have all the various investment vehicles, and we explain these companies are doing this, these companies are doing that. Here's how it fits together as an ecosystem, and something that you clearly see is whether it's Accenture or Deloitte or McKinsey, you see these consulting giants, let's call them. They've been around, and whatever the topic of the day is, they purport to indicate, yep, we can help you. We can charge you a lot of money. A, it's always that, but then B, we can help ramp you up, however far you want to go on whatever journey it might be. And it's very clear that these companies are out there and they're seeking to indicate an expertise in AI. And to my knowledge, you're one person. How is it that you basically have had so much initial success as one person coming into the space when we know there are those gigantic players out there with PhDs in every which field that you can imagine coming to bring those resources to bear all the time?
I think that one of the things that I'm uniquely good at is I'm really good at taking complexity and synthesizing it down into something that's less intimidating and more easy to digest. And specifically, the thing that has really enabled me to get in with companies is having paradigms that I can explain them in a 1 hour meeting. People leave that meeting fundamentally thinking about how they might use AI differently. And when you can have that kind of lightning bolt, it can really transform the way that a company and especially a leadership team is thinking about artificial intelligence. And for me personally, like my big go, no go for a potential partner is, do I like have the access and influence to actually go in and work with the executive team? And I'm talking the highest level executives. So I had a huge opportunity that would have been very lucrative, but the executive team was like, this is for my team. This isn't for us. Like our jobs are too specialized, too important. It needs to be too intelligent. And I was like, that's just not a good fit for me because so many companies right now are looking at AI as a tool, like as an add-on, as a bolt-on, as compared to really looking at it as a paradigm shift and saying, how are we going to rethink our work? How are we going to rethink our workplace? And, like the CEO of NVIDIA has said that he's used an AI thought partner for every major decision he's made in the last 2 years. I don't know many companies that don't want the kinds of results that NVIDIA is getting right now. So the idea of, the executive team being above AI, while it's very, very common right now, is really one of the big places where I'm just like not interested if you don't want to engage in it yourself.
Rebecca, you mentioned the deep dive you took into AI back in 2020. Now, I imagine it's safe to say that the AI ecosystem has evolved quite considerably since 2020. Perhaps the turning point being the announcement of ChatGPT. But these days, it feels like if you drop your phone, three new AI tools spill out. There's so much option out there. There's so much choice as users in terms of tools that can help you do this, that, and so forth. In a way, that's good because you can be so much more productive. You can do so much more that you just didn't know you could before. But it's also easy to get overwhelmed in the sense that you feel, okay, this tool has really helped me, but there are these dozens of other tools that I know nothing about, and maybe I need to learn everything. So as you speak to your clients and different organizations, what's the starting point? Like, how does a team leader or a CEO wrap their heads around where to start and what sort of tools they should look at, and how do they narrow down the menu of options into what's really necessary for them to do?
Yeah, so I will say that there are some cases where it does make sense to be looking at specialized tools. And right now we're in this really awkward growth phase where there's just a huge innovation overhang. Like the if nothing changed about AI for now for the next 5 years, like we would still be finding new applications for it 5 years from now. That's the level of like technology overhang that exists right now. All of that being said, one of the like awkward parts of that is just the fact that there are so many tools and they're jumping out here, there, and everywhere, and you don't know the quality, you don't know whether or not they'll fit into your workflow. So my like greatest recommendation is choose one. And personally, I think ChatGPT is kind of your jack of all trades. You're going to kind of get the best of most worlds by using ChatGPT, and pay the $20 a month and get the pro version, people. And so, you know, when we think about starting with a tool like that, or starting with any tool, but starting with a basic LLM, my number one recommendation is just get your reps in. You know, you're going to really start to build intuition the more that you work with it. So I don't even care if an executive doesn't use it for their job, but starts using it to plan their vacations. Like that to me is a win, because what we really want people to start doing is developing an intuition of how to work with, I call it an army of Ivy League interns. You know, so like on the one hand, they're brilliant. They have a PhD in every single subject. They're amazing. But on the other hand, like you're working with a day zero intern. They don't know who you are. They don't know what success looks like. They don't have any context. They don't have any context about your work environment or how you like to talk. And you don't have any context on them either. And developing that trust, which is something that happens naturally when you work with an individual, like a human individual, that's the kind of intuition and trust that we're looking to have people develop with an AI system. Now, this is complicated by the fact that it's changing, it's improving, and like all of that's really wonderful. But fundamentally, what we're really trying to do at the beginning is just develop that basic intuition of understanding what it means to work with each other. And, you know, I think that when it comes to the beginning, any reps are better than no reps, but reps that involve your work are going to be the best. And, you know, Chris actually has a really great like first use case story, I think. If you don't mind sharing it, Chris, I think it would be really interesting for people. But for context, like Chris literally emailed me and was like, I don't really see how this is going to impact me or how this is going to be super valuable for me. And I was like, thank you so much for saying that, because so few people are willing to actually come forth and be like, you know, I don't really know how to get this to work. I don't really know that I can use this well. I have Google. What else do I need? And Chris basically said that, and we actually worked together on a use case that worked really well for you. Do you mind sharing, Chris?
No, and it's great. So just because I host the Next Big Thing podcast does not mean that I'm just adopting willy-nilly all these different technologies. So essentially, we were talking, and Perplexity Pro came up in conversation, and I was sitting there thinking, oh, good grief, like another one of these things, because I'm sitting thinking anytime I want to find something on the internet, like Google's not perfect, nothing is perfect, but I do actually find a version of what I'm looking for. It's not like I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, another set of 10 blue links, what am I going to do? So I felt like I was getting everything that I needed. And what ended up happening is I started trying it out, and it was almost embarrassing. So again, host of the Next Big Thing podcast, the first thing I do is I take a PDF. Now I'm used to I was age 16 in the year 2000, so Napster was coming out. So those are sort of my formative internet years. So a lot of stuff in my mind always sort of goes back to what things were like in 2000. And so the fact that I put a PDF in and an answer that made sense in any way whatsoever came out, I was sitting there going, "Oh, this is great." And I'm going to tell Rebecca immediately. I used ChatGPT, I put a PDF in, and it summarized it, and it didn't give, gibberish, because my standard was, oh my gosh, it can just recognize what's in the PDF. Like I wasn't even thinking of anything beyond that. It can just recognize the PDF. This is amazing. And Rebecca was like, okay, so you're at like the kindergarten level. She didn't say it like that, but if you think of it like grades, I'm like the kindergartner just, entering the classroom with that use case. And she basically said, think of it like you have a new intern or a new employee. And it clicked for me because I remember as a first time manager, I would sit there and I would give a direction. And many people listening might be managers. So they all remember probably the first few times they give a direction and they're thinking of what they expect to come back, and then there's what actually comes back, and there's a bit of a difference. There could be a bit of a large difference there, and it's not because the person is bad or that what you're looking for is bad. It's that you gave a direction and you didn't really know how it was received. And the cool thing about this AI stuff is you can give a direction and then you can give a new direction immediately, and it's going to immediately give you a new answer. And there's an unlimited amount of back and forth that you can do, at least in the 4.0 model. There are certain other models where you might have to watch the number of times you ask things, but in the 4.0 model, you on an unlimited basis without worrying, is it getting tired? Is it getting burned out? Is it working too late? All that stuff doesn't matter. So this idea of honing your questions, thinking about directions, and the coolest thing was I was looking up a paper on quantum physics, which is a sort of internal passion project of mine, but I can't necessarily say I have a degree or any experience. So getting the system to basically give some analogies and to explain it at maybe a 10th grade level as opposed to a PhD level, even if you're putting in a PhD paper, this is a huge unlock, because now all of a sudden that world of academia, that world of academic papers that I see in Nature or Science that I could barely understand at the surface, now that has completely opened up, and you're able to take what knowledge you can from those sources, understand it a lot better. And it has been, if I only ever use it for that, which I'm sure I won't because we'll keep evolving, it's been amazing the past few months. So I certainly thank Rebecca for showing me the light in some of these regards.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important there, Chris. And well, two things that are really, really important. So first of all, it is an amazing, amazing, like learning thought partner, teacher. Basically, I can access intellectual concepts that I found incredibly difficult to impossible to access 6 months ago. But a lot of that comes down to that iterative nature that you just mentioned. And the way I look at it is AI brings us each and every single one of us unlimited intelligence with infinite patience and instant results. And if you put those three ingredients together with a person who's motivated to some end, like you can get some really, really impressive results from that. And, you know, and that idea of just unlimited, I'm going to say it again because I really think it's super valuable, but unlimited intelligence, infinite patience, and instant results. And you put those three things together and it's just like, what is possible?
I'll give you another use case, Rebecca, which was a bit unexpected. When I'm not co-hosting this podcast with Chris or doing my work at Wisdom Tree, one of the things I like to do in my own time is write music as well. And I write songs in my native language, which is Urdu from Pakistan. And there's another language, Punjabi, which I wanted to write a song in, but I somewhat had a writer's block because I've not been exercising those muscles of writing in that language. So I thought, let's try ChatGPT for some inspiration. And I put in some prompts, gave it some ideas, and asked it to come back and give me something in Punjabi, the regional language in Pakistan and India. And it wasn't perfect, but it was still good enough that I was having a conversation and it was giving me ideas. And I, from that, put something together. So fascinating how it's not just English that it's really good in. It's developing great capabilities in these other languages, which is very interesting. But also, most recently, and this is something I want to ask you about, we've had the new model come out, the O1, which is now available. I know we've had the 4, the 4.0, and now the O1, which is being hyped up as very good for its complex reasoning ability. I'm curious to get your take on how you see how this journey of ChatGPT through these models has made it better, and how you've seen the use cases evolve as those models have evolved.
Yeah, the use cases really do evolve as the models evolve. And I think if we look at kind of a 4.0 versus an 0.1, because that's what's on everyone's mind in this moment, I think it's a really good example of how use cases will evolve. So when we look at a model like 0.1, fundamentally, well, actually, one of the things that I'm going to step back for just a second and talk a little bit about AI use in general. So one of the pieces that people find really like struggling, or that they struggle with or find really challenging about AI use is that they expect it to go in and they expect it to be easy. They expect it to be effortless, or like they don't really have to use their brain. But the thing is right now, AI has no executive functioning. So it does no multi-step reasoning. If you do ask it to do multi-step reasoning, it doesn't do it particularly well. And so, one of the things I always talk about is how do we break this down into smaller pieces? And I remember, like, when I was talking to the research team and Chris, one of the things that kind of blew their mind was that I was having it go through these multi-step reasoning pieces. I wasn't even reading most of the response. Like, I would skim it for like high level takeaways and then give it some feedback based on the high level takeaway, but I wasn't even reading most of its response. And a good chunk of that is because I needed it to go through those steps, but like I didn't need to go through all of those steps. And so a good chunk of why AI is so cognitively tasking to use right now is because you have to be its own executive function. And for something like coding, it's really, really difficult to break it down into those little tiny pieces and then put it back together again. Whereas something like research, it's easier to be like, okay, brainstorm these things, now make it into an outline. Like the steps are a little bit clearer. And so when we look at where are places that 0.1 is really excelling at, that it isn't possible to have that type of result in 4.0, most of it comes down to things where you really need that executive functioning, but it's not super easy to make it happen externally. And so when I look at it, it's places like coding. For a lot of people, things where they aren't breaking it down into smaller pieces, they're going to get better responses from 0.1 than 4.0. But one of the things that I really like to emphasize to people is that right now and for the foreseeable future, what we bring to the table as humans and what we bring to the table as managers is basically our judgment. And when you think about what a manager's job is, it's basically at the start of a task and at the end of a task. And so at the start of a task, we need to use a lot of judgment to say, hey, like, this is what I want that task to look like. This is what success criteria are. All of the context that goes into successfully relaying to another person or an AI intern of what you want that output to be. And then they spend a lot of time at the other end of that judging, does this output meet those success criteria? What feedback do I need to give it in order for that to be a successful implementation? And when you break it down into those smaller steps, you simply, like, you get two things out of it. First of all, you get to have more influence every single step of the way, and you get to understand some of the logic that's underpinning that output. But the other piece of it is that you can you can take more cognitive ownership over the endpoint. So for a team like Chris's, which is really focused on qualitative research, I think that it's really important to actually go through all of those executive functioning steps. And a lot of that comes down to being able to take intellectual ownership at the end and also to be able to influence it as it goes along. For someone who's on more of a quantitative research side, who's doing a lot more coding, where those individual steps in the middle aren't nearly as important. Yes, the overall architecture is important. Yes, like the fact that it functions is important, but those little individual steps are less clear and less important for them to take individual ownership over. That's a place where 0.1 is really, really going to excel. But I kind of accidentally uncovered a whole other topic here, which I get into fights with some of my friends who are teachers about, because most of them hate AI and are like, do not be showing my children AI, like all of this, they're kind of anti-technology in this unusual way to me. But it really comes down to this idea of, are we using AI to fundamentally enhance our own abilities and enhance what we can deliver? Or are we using AI as a shortcut to a acceptable deliverable? And here's the thing, in the corporate world and in life in general, both of those are good answers. There are times where I just want a good enough answer and I don't need it to be better than something that I could produce. But for most of the things that I care about, for most of the things of value, like my ambition is not to write 5 times as much. My ambition is to write 10 times as well in the same amount of kind of time and energy space. And by using AI in a way that's going to force you to go through those processes and force the AI to go through those processes, I actually think that there's a lot of value of actually walking through all of those individual steps. So when I look at how use cases evolve, a lot of those use cases are about making things easier for people. And O1 is going to do that. It's going to make analysis better. It's going to make those steps that you have to go through fewer. But I also think that there's the potential for it to start getting used in much more of a shortcut way in places where we really shouldn't be looking for shortcuts and instead should be really looking at how can we 10x our potential as compared to how can I do this in, a quarter of the time.
Rebecca, you made me, as you were discussing sort of the idea of teachers, it made me think back, and again, like I'm sure there are people listening that might have been born after the year 2000. So whenever you started your academic journey, you have certain reference points. And for me, the time I was going through it, I remember the best thing that you had available, at least at your fingertips, was the calculator. And you could, if you knew how to do it, and you just kept all the steps in your mind, you could do everything on the calculator and just write one number if you're in like a math test, and that's it. Now, teachers basically said, okay, even though we respect that, yes, people can do that, we don't need them to derive what a cosine or a sine or a tangent is. At the end of the day, we still need to prove that they know the journey of reasoning through the math problem, not just the fact they can hit the buttons in the right order on the calculator. So the calculator for a time, at least when I was in school, was sort of the big thing. And you saw teachers adjusting their approach to basically recognize there are certain valuable aspects of a calculator, but we can't make it the be all and end all. And I loved how you were sort of describing that, because you mentioned the word shortcut. And in a sense, if you're using the calculator as a shortcut, not actually understanding the math, you're probably shortchanging yourself in the future. But if you use it in the proper way, you're probably going to get a lot further and be able to do a lot more interesting and powerful mathematic functions. And so when you look at what teachers may or may not do as they approach now this tool, that's the Pandora's box is open. So it's out there. It's something people are going to be faced with. They're going to use it regardless. Hopefully they use it in a productive way and they don't forget to learn what good writing looks like, or what a story or storytelling looks like, and all of that. But what are some things that you would think are good for teachers out there or managers, such as myself, to guide people towards, so that we're always guiding them away from just the pure shortcut approach and guiding them towards a more 10xing their capability approach that can be better for them in the long run?
Yeah, well, I've definitely seen some really interesting and innovative things that some, especially professors, have been doing. I'm pretty sure that there's a guy out of, I think it's the University of Arizona, but I'm not 100% confident on that. But basically, what he did was he wrote what he believed to be a very good prompt to answer the question of his final exam. And then he gave that answer to the students and said, I want you to work with the AI to improve that. And so rather than saying like, okay, we want to get from 0 to 1, it's about how do we take something that's really good and improve it? And, I think that that's like a really kind of interesting and innovative alternative to what a lot of people are doing right now. But I would also say that, while I do think that it's super important to learn things like what is good writing and the like, A, I'm not sure that I actually learned that in school. And B, like, I don't know how important it is to be an amazing speller at this point. To be a passable speller, fine. I know I don't really remember how to do anything I did on my graphing calculator now. And so when I look at it, I'm going, these are going to be the tools of these people's career. Like, this is going to be how everything gets done 5 years from now, let alone a decade from now. And so, when we're looking at a tool like that, when we're looking at, a cash register or a calculator, like, okay, can I do some math in my head? Sure. Is there value in understanding what's happening when I do these things in a cash register? Sure. But like, do I actually really need to like memorize all of my 12 by 12 timetables? I don't know. And so, when I'm looking at this, I'm going, how can we teach the skills to use these tools to the absolute highest of our ability? And specifically, how can we teach people how to be interested in learning? I think that one of the big challenges that we have as a society right now is that very few people are interested in learning. And when I look at the people who are like amazing at AI adoption versus those who struggle more, a huge chunk of it comes down to curiosity and learning. And I do want to come back to that and talk for just a second. But like, Chris, I think you mentioned this where you were like, I didn't really see the value. And honestly, I got on and I was like kind of intimidated and overwhelmed. And a lot of people are just kind of scared of this change. They don't know how to manage that potential uncertainty. They don't know what to do with the fact that this computer might now be able to largely do a lot of my job. And especially for those who have never done management, who don't recognize the value that has to like, it can't just do your job. Like it needs to be told what your job is. It needs to be told what a good version of that looks like. And if you don't have those skills to kind of step back and look at what are those higher values that I'm contributing, what's the judgment that I'm contributing to the situation, it can be really overwhelming and intimidating. But in my opinion, like as we're looking at, what could this new paradigm look like, we really need humans to be able to focus in and hone the skills that we do have that are unique to us. That being said, if we want to like zoom out a whole bunch and say, what might this new paradigm look like? There's some really, really surprising answers in it. And this is going to take us a lot away from kind of the tactical ideas that we've been talking about and really more focus on kind of a bigger picture thing. But just to give you a sense of like some potential paradigms for the future, like imagine if we had an organization that basically just had executives, a middle management layer that was basically 100% AI, and then people who were executing with the help of an AI thought partner at an incredibly high level. So one of the things that this would look like is like way less meetings, way less email, because guess what? There's going to be perfect understanding from person A to person Z in this organization. The AI is going to know everything and be able to do all of that coordination that happens across tedious amounts of emails and meetings and project management software and all of this. Like all of that could hypothetically be taken on by an AI. And when we start thinking about, okay, well, how do we potentially completely transform not just our workflows, but an organization to tap into this kind of tool and to tap into this power, like the answers can become pretty wild and pretty sci-fi like very quickly. And when we start thinking in that way, to me it's like what we need young people to be doing right now, what we need everyone to be doing right now is learning how to work with these tools, not pretending like they don't exist, not learning independently, but learning how to work with them, because that's what's going to be expected of humans in the future.
And the way you were describing that, and you described this sort of hypothetical company, you got my wheels starting to turn, because it's very often, and at Wisdom Tree we like to think we do a great job managing, and I'm sure every company is the same. But what you notice is you'll have a CEO or somebody in sort of the top seat, and they'll set a vision, and then there'll be the direct reports to the CEO, and then the direct reports to those people, and the direct reports to those people. And a useful test that you could do, and most companies probably wouldn't pass if they're honest, is you basically say, take the person in the most junior level, how well do they know the vision at that point in time of the person at the top, most likely the CEO. And if you basically went around to all the junior people and said, are they saying A, the correct vision, B, are they all saying the same thing, all the way down the list? One of the biggest challenges for companies, and I feel like it's the reason why we have all these emails and all these meetings, is communication is and can be quite difficult. It's not that it's difficult to talk to people. It's just difficult to understand when you're saying a certain set of words. What is the other person interpreting, taking it in? People think of the game telephone from when they were kids. In that case, it's just one word. In businesses, it's complex ideas, and everybody's sort of putting their own spin, their own words on it, their own background, their own biases. And by the time you go from the top to the most junior person, frequently the most junior people do not always know what the mission of the company even is. So I just wanted to say, Rebecca, I love your idea of basically AI helping to facilitate cleaner, clearer, more efficient, and better communication, because it feels like you can spend your whole career as a manager thinking about ways to do that and barely scratching the surface because it is so difficult and always changing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, Chris, it goes in the other direction as well, where, it's really difficult for high-level executives to actually get the insight and understanding of what's preventing them from meeting these goals that they have. What's actually like, what are the actual grit in the gears? And so often companies get in their own way, in ways that they aren't necessarily able to acknowledge or even see. And this is another great example of, a place where AI used as a bolt-on tool is probably not going to be nearly as helpful as AI being used as a paradigm shift. And an example of that is like AI used as a bolt-on tool will likely result in more emails. And like nobody needs more emails. More emails is unlikely to result in huge productivity gains. And especially as we're looking at, a slightly longer time frame where the AI is going to be, less heavily subsidized by venture capital. What we're going to see is that these AI costs will increase, and as those costs increase, there's going to need to be real measurable cost savings. Ideally, we have those immediately, but I think a huge chunk of that is going to come from not just bolting it on as a tool and using it as a like, hey, we could do twice as much now, but instead saying, we don't want to do twice as much. We want to have twice the results. And what do we need to do? What do we need to cut out? Where can we become more efficient in order to get those results? And to me, this is a conversation that's been a huge challenge in a lot of organizations, and a place where there's been tremendous pushback because no one really knows the answer. No one wants to say, like, I will stake my job on 2xing my results based on this. No one knows what happens if we put out, content that's 10x as good, versus twice as much is a lot more predictable. But in a place and in a marketplace that's just going to become even more saturated, we're already oversaturated, but it's going to become even more saturated with content and information and everything else. Like, we really need to be finding those strategies that are going to be game shifters as compared to 2x as much strategies.
So, Rebecca, Chris and I, we do a lot of presentations for investors at conferences, meeting rooms, and so forth. Now, we sometimes show them data, we sometimes show them facts about certain things, and sometimes we tell them stories. Now, uh, our thesis is that when you give people a lot of facts and information, chances are some things might stick, but others they will fade away. But when you wrap all of that in a story, I think that's something that the human mind can relate with, and of course it's something that sticks for a longer period of time. We know that AI is very good with data. uh, I know you are a storyteller yourself. I'm curious to get your take on how storytellers can use AI to tell a better story and refine their stories and reach the audience that they need to reach. How do you see that dynamic playing out?
Yeah, well, I think that when it comes to storytelling, there's kind of two pieces to it that are well, maybe three pieces that are incredibly important. And I think that one of the things that AI can really do for storytellers is enable us to shift more of our attention to this kind of first piece, which is we really need to set up the story. We need to identify what is the lesson that we want people to take away from it. What are good, real human examples of this lesson? And here's the thing, like when you guys are putting together a presentation, you're probably spending the majority of your time actually putting together the presentation. Like it just takes a lot of man hours and effort, and you have to make sure that all of these pieces are right and that they're fitting together, versus spending the time saying, okay, all I'm going to do is come up with the absolute best outline possible. And when you can apply, that unlimited intelligence with infinite patience and instant results to only this first step, and the two of you are hashing that together, and imagine you got to spend 80% of your time that you would build a presentation on that first step. Like the leaps in potential are huge there, because suddenly you're spending your time on the part that's going to make the largest difference. And then you can assign that work out. And this is one of those places where, when I watch people like attempt to build a presentation with AI, they aren't shifting their workload forward like that. Rather, they're just like asking it to build a presentation and it does a very mediocre job. And to me, it's like, no, what we really need to be doing is spending our time actually thinking about what does the presentation want to say? What is the story? What is a better example? And you can ask the AI for 50 ideas for that. And it's totally fine giving you 50 ideas and then 50 more and then 50 more. It has no emotional reaction to unreasonable requests. And so then from there, you can outsource a lot of the actual doing and then spend your time really thinking about how can I make sure that this result is reflecting the effort that we put in at first? How can I make sure that this is really going to land with people? And one of the other pieces that I've actually been spending a lot of time working on with some other clients is around this idea of kind of like infinite listening rooms. And so you can then take that presentation at the end and you can play it to different potential audiences. You could say, how might this land for CEOs of this size company? How might this land for, directors of strategy? How might this land for investment advisors? And you can really be looking at, how is this going to land for different target populations? And you can look at young people, old people, people of different cultural backgrounds, and you can have like infinite amounts of feedback from different perspectives that can really just massively improve your capacity to tell the right story. When I think about storytelling, like one part of it is you got to be able to tell the right story that matches with the message that you want. But the other part of it is really around kind of surprise. So when you think about the best stories and the stories that actually stick with you, there's a lot of things that feel really comfortable about them. And then there's one thing that's like, whoa, wasn't expecting this. And what I will tell you right now is that I haven't seen the AI do that, whoa, wasn't expecting this part particularly well. It doesn't necessarily understand human surprise in the same way that master level storytellers do. I will say it's very good at good storytelling. It has not hit amazing storytelling yet. And I was reading a use case by this woman. She writes like romance novels. I don't know, I've never read anything by her, so this wasn't about her specifically, but it was about how she was using AI. And she's in one of those, she writes for like Amazon self-published. They have to publish a ton of books. That's like their business model. And she was saying that like when she just had the AI do it, they were really boring, repetitive stories that had good story structure, but there was nothing about them that was interesting. And what she found was that she needed to supply the backbone. So she needed to like create the skeleton, but then she didn't need to actually write out the detail of a single scene. She didn't need to do that development of the details. The AI was able to do that in a way that required minimal editing, but without the skeleton that she had created, and without the surprising elements, and without the unexpected aspect of the story structure, it just really fell flat because it was exactly what people expected. And while there is space for stories that are exactly what people expected, if you want to convince someone, if you want to, make something really memorable, if your goal is to change minds, there needs to be something worthy of change in there. So I think it's incredibly good at freeing up time. I think it's incredibly good at story structure. So it can definitely give you feedback on making your story better. But then I also think it needs that je ne sais quoi. It needs that human element of the unexpected, the uncomfortable, the change, the surprise. And I haven't seen it get very good at that yet.
I suppose that's where the danger is, that we all start producing very similar generic kind of work where everyone begins to sound very similar because everyone's relying quite heavily on what ChatGPT is producing and so forth. But maybe, like you said, we get to a stage where everyone's become uh, baseline proficient with using AI. And at that point, we start thinking, okay, how do I bring my own personality and my own style and my own creativity to this? And maybe that's the point where we really start to elevate our level of output that we start getting from AI.
Totally. And you can see that play out in a really visceral way with AI art. So if you look at, like, there's an entire style of AI art that if you see it, you're just like, oh yeah, that was definitely created by an AI. And that's what a beginner user is going to go in and actually create. But what we've been able to see is that as people become more skilled practitioners, as people have been able to experiment and play more, there was actually a pretty large scale study done recently where basically humans could not differentiate between AI and human created art, which is across a whole bunch of different styles, timelines. It's pretty wild. And I will say I took part in that study as a participant, and I got a 49% accuracy, so less good than randomly guessing whether or not something was AI or human created. I'm not an art critic. I don't know that much about art, but like for context, as people become more skilled, the capacities just really increase. And that's why I'm so pro people becoming skilled practitioners. And, one of the things, and Chris has heard me say this many times, but if what you create sounds like AI wrote it, you are failing. To me, that is that's being a kindergartner level practitioner of AI. And so much of it is about really learning how to work with the AI to develop your own tone, your own voice, your own skill. And because AI, use is a skill in and of itself and is a skill that we all need to develop and continue to improve on, like that is going to define this next generation of people who are incredibly good at producing things. And that's going to include artists, that's going to include writers, that's going to include all different types of people. Now, the fear that I have is that we get into an economy that does premium mediocre really well. And by premium mediocre, basically what I mean is like the Panera breading of the entire world. And like we have seen a Panera breading of the entire world for many things. Like you can now go to any city in the entire world basically and find a McDonald's or a similar level chain. And for a lot of people, they're content with that level of consumption. But the thing that gives me hope is that even though, yes, I can go and find 100 highly mediocre chains, we're also seeing an incredible vibrance in many other aspects of our culture where you have to seek it out, but it's still there and it's better than it has ever been. So my hope is that even if we do get a lot of like premium mediocre from AI, there's still going to be these places of just incredible cultural and creative flourishing, if you care to seek it out.
I personally loved that segment there when Rebecca said premium mediocre. I'll admit I had no idea what that means, but when she equated it to the Panera breading of consumption, it's like, oh, okay. So it's amazing. I guess Panera's done a great job with the brand because you immediately know what it is. It's kind of good, not great. You're gonna get the calories you need. You're not gonna be that excited about doing it. It is that is I've never heard it before, but I now think I will never forget. Now,
I have
Rebecca,
to
I
say
feel
that is
like
not my word. That comes from Tyler Cowen. And
oh, okay.
he put it out there probably like 5 years ago or something. And I use premium mediocre all the time because I think it is a fantastic descriptor of like so much of what we encounter on a day-to-day basis, sadly.
Tyler Cowen in the podcast world, one of the best.
Mm-hmm.
I know,
I read mostly. I know I'm like old school. I don't know what's going on with me, but I'm mostly a reader, not a podcaster.
what I think we should discuss now, clearly we're in the back half of the episode. We've covered a lot. And Rebecca, you said something to the tune of, my interpretation of it was, we're in a big spending phase right now, and whether that spending is from the biggest companies in the world, and a lot of it is, whether it's from venture capital, whether it's from just a mixture of all these different things. We have a declared AI czar coming into the U.S. Policymaking apparatus. So we've got a lot of balls in motion, but what we ultimately will need, and you've alluded to it, but we should think about the appropriate way to judge the progress. Because the funny thing about speaking with investors, as I know Mobeen can attest, is it's very common that you go in, you do the meeting, you do the presentation, maybe they do an investment in whatever you were talking about, and within 6 to 12 months, they're basically saying, okay, where's the returns? And if you're honest about it, thinking back through history, whether it's electricity or computers, smartphones, calculators, ATMs, all this stuff that is everywhere now, it took it a while to get everywhere. At various phases, it wasn't necessarily a guarantee that it was going to take off. There are all the examples of, we know video is a good idea, but people look back through the past, and there was a time where there was the Betamax and there was the VHS, and it was actually a discussion which one should be adopted. So you have all these examples of these different technologies through time that, in hindsight, it appears, well, obviously that was the way you should do it. Obviously, that was the best one. Obviously, that's how it should be used. And so I know you've spent some time thinking of the broader historical context, and I would love to get your take, because Mobeen and I have tried it, we've written about it, but it's one of those points I feel like you can never address too many times, because everyone is trying to come up with their own way of measuring progress, and when they don't see it, within the next 5 minutes in today's world, it's almost like, oh, I guess it's not working. And in my mind, that's always the wrong answer. It always takes longer than 5 minutes. But how long should it take is the mental construct I feel like we all need to challenge ourselves to create.
Yeah, how long should it take is it's a tough question because so much of it, there's so many variables that that answer depends on. But when I step back and I think about AI from, the highest vantage point that I can, it really comes back to this idea of technology is just a power magnet. So it's a power centralizer. And you think about, what does technology offer individuals, societies, humans in general? And basically what it does is it enables us to leverage ourselves. So, the person who has a gun has more power than a person who does not. And when I think about this within the context of AI, this feels like an incredibly powerful leverage multiplier, specifically because it's leveraging our cognitive abilities. And our cognitive abilities have basically defined everything about the human species and humanity's entire history. And so when I look at this from a really high level, I very much see this as a cognitive revolution. And, when I think back on other revolutions, so, you can think back on the Industrial Revolution, or to me, the best parallel is the Electric Revolution, because it really was about finding ways to leverage a new type of power. And this cognitive power is very, very much a new type of power. And what actually happened in the electrical revolution was that we spent about 40 years getting minimal gains out of it. So it started off where people were like, well, we can put light bulbs in factories and now we can be open more hours. Look at our, increases in productivity. And then they started going and they did put individual, motors into machines, but they still had them laid out in the same way that worked for a singular power source, for the pre-electrical factory. And it wasn't until basically General Electric and Ford were the two companies that really pioneered completely new ways to organize the factory around the potential productivity gains of electricity. And you'll note that both of those companies became generational powerhouses. And so when I look at this, so much of what I see as the potential for AI doesn't come from bolting it on as a tool. It doesn't come from learning how to research 20% better. It doesn't come from being able to send twice as many emails. It fundamentally comes from really looking at how we need to reorganize organizations, how we need to reorganize our society, how we need to rethink how we use cognitive power. And, I think that the idea of saying, like, what happens if we replaced essentially middle management with an omniscient, always present, can answer as many questions as you want, AI tool is a really good example of kind of stepping back and saying, like, what might a new paradigm be for that? A different paradigm would be to say, like, maybe the executives are the AI, and lots of people are talking about how can we replace the bottom layer, but I think it's much more interesting to say, like, let's start out wild. Let's think about these possibilities and let's retool and experiment with those kinds of thoughts in mind. It's not to say that, like, no one knows the answers to these questions, which is part of the reason that I'm so excited to be, like, in there doing the work inside of companies where we're really trying to figure these questions out. But so much of it is going to come down to not how can we adapt AI to our workflows, but how can we adapt our workflows and our process and our products and our output to what AI is really well equipped to empower us with? How can we take that, cognitive power? How can we use it in ways that no one can foresee right now, that isn't expected, and that's unique and individualized by company? I personally think, like, the finance industry is going to look very different from the construction industry. And a really good example of that is, like, the construction industry is not going to have huge AI gains until we get robots that can actually go out and start getting the data in the field that the AI needs in order to be intelligent about it. And yes, they can absolutely get gains in that 20-30%. And I have a client, a client who's across most of the US in construction right now, where they are seeing very large gains like that. However, where they're going to see that transformation isn't going to happen until robotics catch up. And so when I'm, trying to step back and look at this from a really high level, it's very, very much about what does brain power mean for this industry, for this company, and how can we use that in a way that's just going to unlock not 20% gains, but 20x gains. And in my opinion, if you aren't looking for 20x gains, like, you're playing the wrong game with AI right now.
Well, I know at Wisdom Tree, our management team is going to hear the 20x gains and they're going to get excited, as I'm sure a lot of other companies will. For kind of the last topic, I just thought of something. So when Rebecca speaks, I have to admit, just new ideas come to the table. We're going to go down the line. So there's three of us. We're each going to pull out our veritable crystal ball, and we are going to say what we think the most exciting application in the coming years of AI might be. Because we've been talking a lot about what this may happen, that may happen down the line. To give the paradigm, the example, I believe, and I've gone around to various cities talking about this, AI in the context of drug discovery is going to be very interesting. I think the way in which research is done and the type of data that we collect and the way in which we array that data in sort of the chemical realm. And we can note that the AlphaFold sort of complex did receive a Nobel Prize in chemistry this year. So people are noticing this topic. And as you see, just this week, further advances in quantum error correction, there is a potential intersection if we're thinking about simulating biological processes, functions, and chemistries at the smallest possible resolution of detail. Quantum computers can unlock some very interesting things, assuming you can get them up and running at the commercial level. So I looked into my crystal ball. I said AI for the purposes of drug discovery. Let's pass the microphone over to Mobeen. Mobeen, what is your crystal ball telling you?
I'm quite excited about autonomous driving. I think mobility is advancing at a very exciting pace. Um, it's a topic where it gets people engaged. If you're a car enthusiast, you love to see exciting new things in this space. But I think it's completely changing. Electrification was one thing, and now autonomous driving, which we've been waiting for so long, but it just hasn't come through. Now it seems like it's a lot closer than we think it is. So I'm quite excited to see more developments, especially with perhaps a more favorable regulatory regime in the US, to see how that accelerates, excuse my pun, accelerates this journey towards autonomous driving next year.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to piggyback on you a little bit because I do think that biotech is probably the most exciting kind of like midterm uh, opportunity. And the way that I look at this is AI is fundamentally just a giant pattern matching machine. And when we look at aspects of our lives that we don't understand very well, we honestly do not understand our bodies very well at all. And so as an example, I know that there's been huge gains in just the last like 2 months in the capacity to actually map out the brain and the way that our neurons connect and intersect. And so you start thinking about like what's possible if we actually understand what is going on in our mind. You know, what's possible when we can actually understand how drugs are interfacing with our bodies. What's possible when we think about these second and third order effects that are happening within all of our bodies when we do something simple like take Tylenol, like what is actually happening? It's pretty wild that none of us actually fully understand the implications of it. None of us fully understand the implications of the food that we're eating. I think we're going to see kind of a medicine 3.0 that's going to be a lot higher, like it's going to be framed at a much higher level rather than just simply addressing individual symptoms or like the symptoms of a disease. I think we're going to start to have a much better understanding of what is disease, how is this being impacted by multiple systems within our body, and also like how can we be much, much more targeted about the way that we treat those, both the symptoms and kind of the underlying causes all around. And I think that that's going to happen both in mental health as well as in more like standard physical health, which is hugely exciting for us as a species. Can I leave people with just like a 30-second, here's my 3 best tips to 80/20 your
I love it.
interactions with AI?
Let's
Yeah.
do it.
Awesome. So I thought it would be really valuable to just leave people with some really tactical next steps in terms of interacting better with their, army of AI interns. And the first one is just go and actually use them. So go and interact with them as much as you can. Anytime you have a question, instead of reaching for Google, try using the AI. And your goal there is not necessarily to always come up with the right answer, but it's to start to build that relationship and gain that intuition of what it means to work with your AI intern. The next piece is remember they are a day 0 intern, which means they have absolutely no context unless you tell them. And a good chunk of what really great context looks like is helping them define and understand what success is going to look like for you. So this can be defining what you want that tone to look like, defining, how long you want them to speak, what exactly it is that you're trying to do, giving them context, including stuff like really simple stuff like what industry they work in and what your ambitions are for them is going to be incredibly helpful. And then the third one that I will leave you guys with is to break things down into smaller pieces. I know we've talked about this several times, but you really need, at this moment in time, you really need to shoulder that executive functioning role, and you really need to help them think through a process slowly and step by step in order to get better results. Right now, you can get equal results by just jumping to the end, or mediocre results, premium mediocre results by jumping to the end. But if what you're looking to do is to 20x your own capacity, you really need to break it down into much, much smaller pieces and give them feedback, as well as give yourself the opportunity to do these individual steps, to really think them through, give feedback, and put all of that energy and effort into that first phase of the thinking process, where you're really defining what exactly success looks like.
It would be exciting if the Next Big Thing podcast helped even a few listeners out there on the journey of going from I heard about these things, I heard about these tools, to trying to do a couple of things, to ultimately recognizing, wow, I can have a thought partner, I can have a translator, I can have somebody that can break down. I was looking at the Stanford AI Index report. It's a 500-page document. Would love to read every page in detail, but don't always have time for those 500-page PDFs. And these tools are phenomenal in those regards, and you can get a lot out of them. So I want to thank Mobeen and Rebecca for joining us today. And I want to thank all of our listeners who continue to support the podcast, continue to tune in each and every episode. Mobeen and I have a vision that keeps bringing more exciting topics to the table, exciting guests like Rebecca to the table, and we are going to continue nonstop. So thank you again. Please give us the rating, subscribe, do all that great stuff. Until next time, we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.